Different background light? What do you think? I don't think blue's working. The color of China, like red. You want to do that? Very Chinese episode. Let's do it.
Get away from me!
Goodbye, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Social Distance Cinema Discussion. This week we watched The Farewell. See what I did there? I'm sorry. To dive into The Farewell, we need to know a little bit about the director Lulu Wang's life. Much like the protagonist, Lulu Wang was born in China and at a very young age moved to the United States. There she got her education all the way up until college, and that's when she received the news that her grandmother had cancer. Directors often throw themselves or personal life stories into their work, which makes The Farewell kind of a very highly focused and targeted piece. As we've discussed here many times before, it's always important to give marginalized groups and minorities their representation in culture and media. While the story of Lulu Wang's Nai Nai is entirely unique to her, her cultural identity is something that's a little more widespread. As of 2018, the Chinese represented the third largest group in the US foreign-born population, right behind Mexico and India. Despite this population making up around 45 million people, Lulu Wang struggled to get the funds necessary from United States and Chinese producers.
First question I would get asked is this an American film or a Chinese film? But, you know, it's kind of a trick question because I know what they're getting at, right? They're like, if it's an American film, you can't have an all-Asian cast, people can't be speaking Chinese, it's subtitled. You know, how are we going to market that to a Western audience? But when I went to talk to Chinese investors, they would say, if you want to make a Chinese film, the main character can't be Billy. Her perspective is too Americanized, and the Chinese audience is not necessarily going to follow.
There's one scene that really stuck out to me in this movie, and upon doing my research, I figured out why. When asked what the most difficult scene to shoot for her was, Lulu Wang responded with this.
My hardest day on set was when we were shooting that conversation between Billy and Nai Nai in a room with just white walls. I could tell by the framing of the shot that something was off. Like, it just didn't feel right. Well, yeah, we talked about it for a really long time. We locked the door and everybody's pounding on the door, like trying to get us out of the room, and we were like, we're thinking. And I said, well, if we have white walls, let's just embrace it. You know, like, let's embrace the negative space, to embrace the isolation.
As a filmmaker, if you're not always worried about how compelling your shot is, you're probably doing it wrong. It can be hard to make things look visually compelling in every single scene, which is why she expressed concerns about this. Negative space is basically when you make art using everything but the subject of the image. What really made this scene stick out to me is the paintings in the background of both Billy and Nai Nai. When humans look at people's faces, the first thing they recognize is the eyes. Each of the paintings in the background have eye lines that point directly at the character in that shot. Whenever our eyes start wandering and searching the image for something interesting, we're drawn to the painting, which then shoots us right back to the subject. For extremely emotional moments like this one, this tactic really worked. This movie made me cry. I don't know about you guys. Generally, when movies elicit emotion from us, the first thing we point to is the acting. But how do filmmakers use acting to give us emotional responses?
I wanted Billy to be a conduit, you know, for the audience. And also just for any Asian American, immigrant American, anyone who feels caught between two worlds. She's this vessel that takes us through this journey of navigating her American culture and her family's culture.
Here, Lulu Wang discusses making characters conduits for the audience. This tactic is actually used all the time, and one of my favorite examples is Indiana Jones. Indy intentionally doesn't have much character or personality to him because he's a blank slate for the audience to project themselves onto. There's moments in this movie that are extremely emotional, and Awkwafina shows hardly any emotion at all. We focus on and scan her face to find any emotion, and when we can't find it, we're invited to throw ourselves in her shoes. When the director does this for large portions of the movie, it makes moments when the character actually does show something extremely potent. When Billy finally breaks down in that room, there is a release of emotions, and we're invited to cry in catharsis with her. It's there where we resolve one of the larger themes of the movie, summed up in this quote from an earlier scene.
你觉得在哪里更好？中国还是美国？
不一样，不一样。
啊，那怎么会不一样呢？肯定是在美国会更好些吧？
就是不一样。
啊，我觉得你肯定更习惯在美国的生活。
可能。
啊，
可能。
行，有什么事再叫我。
OK，谢谢。
再见啊。
再见，Thank you。
I don't know about you guys, but I'm really glad that she managed to get funding for this movie, because that clash of cultural identities is largely the theme of the movie. Studios, in the pursuit of marketing a movie to the largest audience possible, sometimes run the risk of alienating just about everyone. So far in our little group, there's no one, at least that I know of, that matches that Chinese American descent or background. Yet there are really powerful moments in this movie that speak to me. One in particular was when Nai Nai speaks to Billy about finding a boyfriend.
赶紧找个照顾你的人呐、我照顾我自己奶奶。你还年轻，孩子，随着年龄越来越大呀，还是找个能照顾你的人好。
Back off, Mom. And I'm sure there were some that spoke to you. Why don't you go ahead down in the comment section and let me know what they were. But that's because these extremely specialized looks into very minute pieces of culture show us the humanity in everyone. Even though different cultures have different ways of doing things, that doesn't mean they're not human. While the premise is something that our culture can't relate to, we can't not tell someone that they have cancer, there's little things that every culture can relate to. So much so that I think it's pretty easy to see myself in this situation, because I could very easily respect my parents' decision to not tell someone that they were dying. I believe in coincidence, but everything seems really surreal right now. On the night we watched The Farewell, a movie about a Chinese family not telling their grandmother that she has cancer and carrying that emotional burden for her, we find out that Chadwick Boseman dies of colorectal cancer, and he didn't tell anyone because he decided to carry that emotional burden for us. A little under 2 years ago, I worked on my first big budget movie set in Philadelphia, and Chadwick Boseman was acting in it and also producing it. One night at like 3:30 a.m., I stood 20 feet away from him, and I didn't say anything to him, but I still thought it was really cool. But I guess what makes it really coincidental for me is the fact that over the past few months, I've been in over my head working with the American Cancer Society to produce a live TV spot in the month of September. Ordinarily, the ACS gets a lot of its funding from live events and programs, but since we're in the middle of a global pandemic, they have to try new things. You could ask probably any nonprofit right now and they'd tell you that the funding is way down. Not that that's their fault. But the research and resources the American Cancer Society provides is something we can't afford to lose, because clearly cancer has the power to affect all of us, and cancer doesn't stop. If you're interested in seeing what we've all been working on, tune in to Coaches vs. Cancer Off the Court on Thursday, September 24th on NBC 10 Philadelphia. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and hopefully I'll see you all next week.